Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to talk about the full moon that's coming up pretty soon here on the 24th of the month. And let's take a look at the chart. Without further ado, let's go to the chart. So you should be able to see the chart, and based on, we're just doing the natural houses, beginning with Aries, going all the way around. So we're just having the Pisces sun and the Virgo moon opposite to each other. And there's a few things that are interesting about this full moon configuration that I think we're going to want to pay attention to. We do notice that the sun and the moon are at 5 degrees of Pisces and Virgo, and that's not making any really strong aspects to anything much in the chart. However, one thing that I think is very interesting is that we do have Mars and Venus in conjunction with each other, about a degree apart. And they have just recently, of course, both of them, having been in Capricorn, entered Aquarius, been conjunct Pluto, and then they've moved on beyond that. But we do have a kind of a predominance of the personal planets, including actually Mercury right now. And I think it goes to personal choices that we need to make. I think we're very aware of the relationships in our lives, the Mars and the Venus coming together, male and female. Not necessarily the way your relationship might be, of course, but we do all have masculine components within us, feminine components within us. So it's just interesting to me to see this contrast, which also goes to just the balance between, you might call it yin and yang, you might call it different approaches to things based on how we look at things, whether we look at it from a kind of I'm going to go get that, which is more Mars, I'm putting the mouse on Mars here, or I'm going to be awaiting that, wait to see what the universe brings to me is another way to look at that. And so as we look at relationships, we do want to keep track of the fact that Venus is actually in aspect to Uranus right now, and Uranus is big in this whole lunation cycle because the lunations have been at 20 degrees. There was lunations on February 9th, we had the Aquarius new moon. It was at 20 degrees of Aquarius. Now the sun and moon moved into Pisces, or the sun has moved into Pisces. But that 20 degree mark, of course, actually was a very close square to Uranus. So we do have a Uranian influence on this several new moons that have been coming, and including the next one as well. So Uranus is just with us here in Taurus, and they're not entirely, they are antithetical because Taurus is about the body, Taurus is about being in the here and now, Taurus is about the pleasures of our physical situation and the security that we can get from that, whereas Uranus is disruptor. So Uranus brings in new ideas that can be both good and bad. I mean, it does kind of create a problem as far as if we're expecting things to stay normal. No, instead they're going in all different directions. On the other hand, we do need a little shaking up at times, right? Because Uranus is also about bringing new ideas in. And then we have Venus in this chart, which is the ruler of Taurus. And if we put the mouse on it and we right-click, we can get what the parallels are. And it turns out it's not only parallel to Mars, its close companion, but it's contraparallel as well to Uranus. So there's an element of change and excitement that is embedded within our relationships right now. And you can look at that, as I say, two different ways as nothing wrong with that. Great to explore new perspectives, new ideas. The Grateful Dead line from Robert Hunter, once in a while you can get shown the light in the strangest of places, if you look at it right. I think that really applies so well to Uranus that we don't know where it's coming from. It's deep intuition as well. It can be beyond logic in that way. These transpersonal planets, both Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, they take us beyond this physical plane in certain ways. And so when they're prominent, we do have a chance to see a wider perspective on what's going on with us. So that's all in the air right now, including the fact that Venus is actually tied to Uranus to some extent by that contraparallel there. And then Mercury also combines in the same way, very close contraparallel. We can right-click again, and we see the CP in TimePassages, meaning contraparallel, and it's 12.6, which is an easy way to look at it, not to get confused about degrees and minutes, which we have all over the place with the longitudinal aspects. So 12.6 versus what on the moon, we'd say 12.7. So it is very close. So there's a strong emotional component to our rationality right now. It's thinking outside the box to some extent. It's looking at new ways to see things and seeing things. We don't always see the emotional perspective. We don't always see where our unconscious comes into it, where our emotions come into it. So that's all part of our thinking right now. So our thinking is going beyond, our relationship energy is going beyond, and there's a way that we have now of trying to both stay safe, stay enclosed, stay within our normal activities, but also look beyond that and see if we can make a change, come to a different place with something that we've been doing habitually that may be the key to a new way to go. So that's kind of interesting in this full moon. And another thing that struck me with it is if you look at the positioning here of Mercury and of Saturn at 2 degrees of Pisces, at 9 degrees of Pisces, so that is a 7-degree spread. We take the midpoint, we just go 3.5 degrees, and that's 5. So 3.5 degrees puts it at 5 degrees and 42 minutes. So that's the midpoint of the Mercury and the Saturn, bringing that connection in, even though they're pretty far apart. They're within an orb of a conjunction if you're looking at natal charts. They're not really that close, but on the other hand, right in the middle there, almost at that same 5 Pisces 42, it's 5 Pisces 23, the Sun. So that does kind of bring the interesting thing of Mercury and Saturn kind of together. And remember that Mercury is also closely contraparallel to the Moon. So it does bring in the Mercury, brings in our thought process. I think this is a very thoughtful time. I think we have to really keep our eyes open and keep discernment in our vision and try to get the truth of the matter. See what's going on multiple levels and try not to be deceived by what somebody might say because talk is cheap. But the truth is not so cheap. The truth is important, and that brings me to these new planets. Haumea and Makemake, I talk about them quite a lot lately because I have been doing a lot of research with them, and they do have to do with, these are very much beyond our normal ken. Similarly to the 3 outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Pluto is also a Kuiper Belt object, or a dwarf planet, they call it. I call them KBO planets because that's more descriptive where they are. Also, Ceres is considered a dwarf planet. That's an asteroid, just to make a footnote there. But Pluto, also Eris, at 24 degrees of Aries, but also these new ones, Haumea at 1 degree, 59, almost 2 degrees of Scorpio, and also Makemake at 10 degrees of Libra. And these are prominent in certain ways. There's been a long-running square between Haumea and Pluto, which you can see is 1 Aquarius. So very close square, been a long time, both in the last degree of Scorpio and the last degree of Capricorn for Pluto, and now they're in the beginning degrees of the fixed signs, Scorpio and Aquarius. It's all part of Pluto being in Aquarius, which is this new age that we have that we're trying to deal with now and figure out. Well, this Haumea is part of that because Haumea is telling us not only to pay attention to our connection to nature, because that's what she represents is really just pure nature. And so our connection to nature is really important, and we need to recognize that. It's also about telling the truth. I find it over and over again. It's right action, right relationship, sort of natural law, you might say. What comes naturally to us as humans is being kind to each other and is telling the truth, I believe. And so I say this over and over again when I see somebody with a strong one. I say, oh, you got, Haumea close to the ascendant. You always tell the truth. And they usually say that's exactly right. It gets me in so much trouble. I can't really lie about things. I have to just say what I believe. So these are prominent in a certain way right now. I was mentioning As well, of course, we have the Mercury position at 2 degrees of Pisces is also chiming in with Haumea, so Haumea has a certain prominence to it. And interestingly, as well, we have this long-running sextile between Saturn, now at 9 degrees of Pisces, and Jupiter at 10 degrees of Taurus. That sextile makes a yod to the 10-degree mark across in Libra. The midpoint would be Aries, and the opposite is Libra. In fact, Jupiter being at 10 degrees Taurus 24 minutes, well, by George, look, Maki is 10 degrees Libra 24 minutes. So that's a perfect quincunx or inconjunct aspect, 150-degree aspect, and that makes a yod formation, a finger of God formation, focalizing and pointing toward, and then of course you have also the Mars and Venus in almost 9 degrees of Aquarius also chiming in with a trine to the Maki position. So these two are kind of prominent in this current configuration. And I think it's very interesting because in many ways we see in the politics of our times the truth is on trial. And we see also that there is an urge toward activism. I believe that of the two, Maki is the more activist, making things happen. And I can actually show you making things happen along the lines of, you see, trying to correct toward fairness, trying to make things, like income equality, everybody being treated fairly, women and men equally, health issues being taken care of as a health right rather than a problem, and poverty is another situation. So there's all kinds of social activism and environmental activism reminding us that climate change is very coming down upon us very quickly. So that's a kind of a warning too about the Earth and taking care of the Earth. And Maki is so important in that regard. So I just see the prominence in this full moon, and we may see it in the headlines, that there's all kinds of issues there with taking care of things in a better way, maybe the social activism, trying to see if both parties in the conflict in the Middle East can be resolved, all kinds of things that have to be resolved. And the world is starting to pay more attention. Each individual person is trying to pay more attention. And we say that the masses of everybody is another superpower along with the US, Russia, and China, because if they get all aligned, if everybody sees the same thing and sees, well, this is what has to happen, we have to have a ceasefire, whatever it might be, depending on your politics. But if you are not part of that solution, you're kind of missing out, because the vast conglomeration of everybody, the whole picture that includes every human, every person that's adult and thinking about things, that's a way you can chime in just by your attitude, just by your actions, and doing whatever comes to you to be part of that. That's what's being presented right now. And I'd like to show you just one example chart. Now, I've looked at hundreds of charts. I'm coming up with a new book on these two, what I call nature planets. They're KBO planets in the Kuiper Belt. These are the four biggest, Pluto, Eris, and also Haumea and Maki, and they're the ones that are officially recognized as a kind of planet by the IAU. None of these other candidates are yet recognized that way. So I think it's very interesting. And one example chart that I've used, let me see if I can, So I have Rachel McAdams here. Now, the thing with Rachel McAdams, she's actually somebody that has a rather strong presence of Haumea. You can see that she has a triple conjunction of Mars, Mercury, Neptune, all at actually Mercury and Neptune are at 17 degrees, and then Mars is close by. And then also Uranus is at 17 degrees, and so is Haumea at 17 degrees. So she's got a pretty strong, and the thing about Haumea also, goes with a charismatic personality. These people are they seem like real genuine people. If you know her screen personality, she's played over and over again this kind of a sweet character that's just kind of got a lot of goodness to her, very charming, very she has that charisma that shows up on screen, which I do associate with Haumea. And it's associated also with this kind of love of nature, love of right action, trying to do the right thing. And the question comes up too about Maki Maki, which is at 2359 Leo. And now we don't know her time for sure, but that there's a 5:20 a.m. time that has been put forward, and it's kind of sketchy where that source comes from. So they call it Rodden Rating C. It's not necessarily the most accurate chart, but interestingly, by that chart detail, the 5:20 a.m., we find the moon at 24 degrees of Gemini. So this is right there, so it's sextile. And then her sun degree is 24 degrees of Scorpio, so square to the Maki Maki. So even though Maki Maki doesn't have very many other aspects, that's strong to have Maki Maki both, in definite aspect to both the sun and the moon. So it kind of confirms that early time of 5:20 if we can see evidence of activism in her life, and she is somewhat activist. She's got a website that she created called greenissexy.org. And that was because she's done quite a few things, raised money for violence against women. She's done a lot of things, and including she's very much an environmentalist and wants to see things change. She tries to ride her bicycle when she can, things like that. And this Green is Sexy website, you see, is about taking environmental activism and making it fun, and using her kind of sex appeal, sexy personality and fame to achieve that. Well, this is where I have an interesting little vignette that I checked on the date of the establishment of that website, because that's available on the internet. And I did the transit for that date, which was October 20th of 2006. And we might want to do it for noon, I guess, but it doesn't really matter, because what I'm going to talk about is just these major planetary objects here. Saturn was at 23 degrees of Leo, right on her Maki Maki, when she did this kind of a structural move of putting a website up and making that part of her presence on the world stage, so to speak. So I thought that was very interesting. And also, as it turns out, it is also that Jupiter was sitting there square. So Jupiter and now Jupiter and Saturn, those are called the social planets. Their combination suggests being interested in what's going on in the world, having something to do with that. And look how neatly it lines up with her very degree of Maki Maki in her chart. So I thought that was interesting, something to bring forward. And you can see with this, some of the research, I've just done tons of research. So that's where I get these ideas that Maki Maki is kind of the activist. It is the subject of this yad, so we may see some moves like that. We may see things about Green New Deal or climate change. We may see things just having to do with social activism, because it really does also reflect the balance in the society. And that may be something we see in this last half of the original Aquarian cycle. It's interesting also to reflect on the fact that we have Pluto in Aquarius right now, and what does that mean? It does mean it's a kind of a new stage of things in the culture. But if you think about it, when Pluto was in Capricorn for the first time, which was 2008, it really did explore, as it does, the flaws in the system, the flaws in this case, more the capitalist system, the banks. And here we have it in Aquarius. So this is a question mark, Pluto in Aquarius now, for most of the year, and then makes a little step back into in the fall, just for a few weeks. And so this is mostly in Aquarius now, Pluto. And to me, that has to do with exploring the deficits of some of our Aquarian situation, all the networking we have now, all the humanism we have now, all the rationality and the science we have now, which is also part of what Aquarius represents. And to me, these other nature planets do represent a kind of a contrast to just the pure rationality, because they represent a more mystical viewpoint, the Earth as a mystical place, everything being imbued with wonder and awe, a connection to the universe or to nature as kind of a a larger force than ourselves, recognizing the power of that, recognizing as in the Gaia impulse that there's actually a spiritual component to nature itself. And so I think that's very important as a counter to pure rationalism, which can go too far that way, to pure materialism, which of course leaves out a big part of the picture, that we have what is also spirit and nature as a very important factor in things. So I did want to mention also when we were looking at, that was the thing I forgot to mention with Rachel. So we do have a chance to bring up, that was a saved transit that I had. In the TimePassages software, you can bring up the last 2 transits. And that's a very handy thing because somebody might be looking at that transit, you might have to put away the computer and you're looking at the natal chart, but you can always go back to that transit chart that you were already looking at. So that is a handy feature of the TimePassages software that I wanted to mention while I was at it. So anyway, that's kind of what we have to say about this full moon chart. Interesting how it brings up the thought process and where we can be discerning and where we can try to lend our hand to helping with the situation that we see in the world instead of just being depressed by it. So let's transition back. And in closing, I just want to encourage everybody to do what they can. Don't despair. With these new planets, including Eris, recognize that you just have to find what you are motivated by, what only you tune into, and take care of that. And kind of let it go, too. Let it take care of itself. This very wise Hawaiian elder that I was having the opportunity to connect with when I was in Hawaii with this recent retreat that we did, he said a very wise thing, I thought, which he said, you make your focus, and he put his hands like this, you make your focus and figure out what it is you want, and yes, think in those terms, but then don't think that you're the only way to get there, that it's all up to you. At that point, you have to let it go and wait and see and let the universe contribute and take care of things. And I thought that was a very good way to look at it, that we have what we have, and it's this life, and it's not simple, and it's not always easy. But it is very beautiful, and it does have the opportunity to make progress individually with each one of our own lives and with the culture, because if we don't start paying attention and joining in with the culture and helping to turn it around into a more positive place, as everybody pretty much knows, we're in trouble. So that's it. Take care, friends. Good to speak to you today. So long now.